We are going to move to our next agenda item, which is the 2020 legislative session preparation. And we are actually going to readjust the order of the topics, if that is okay. And we are going to invite the discussion on the regional service centers study, or the presentation from the regional service centers study. And so we'll have Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones, and we'd also like to invite Superintendent Kay Douglas and Executive Director Scott Crane, as well as News Director Duke Mossman.
Yeah, Duke couldn't make it.
And this is an informational item under this topic. Okay. Okay.
Hang on a second. Do you see a code anywhere?
Is it up in the top left-hand corner?
What is it?
BRAM3. Oh, there it is.
Yeah, what's
1003.
okay? 1,
Do you,
2, 003.
this one? So it's this one here. The code is 0720.
Oh, okay.
I'm actually impressed that I can read that. Tell my wife I read that. And that I listened while I was here.
There it is. Good afternoon, board members, Chair, Deputy Superintendent of Operations, Scott Jones. Thank you so much for the time that you've dedicated to this very important regional service center study. I'll get into the details with Superintendent Douglas and Executive Director Crane here in a minute. Of all of the time I've spent here in the 4 years I've been here, among others, this has been the most collaborative and inclusive process that I've experienced in the 4 years here. We're definitely on the road to awesome in so many different areas, but throughout this presentation, you're going to see just how great it is to sit down with a group of individuals and cross-collaborate to come up with viable alternatives that really puts the interests of the individual students and our LEAs at the forefront of all of the decision-making processes that you make and the legislature makes and the state makes as a whole. So with that, we'll get started. This study is a result of the commissioning by Senate Bill 4, which was passed in the 2019 legislative session. The study required governance, funding, and role of the State Board of Education oversight that we reviewed as part of this cross-collaborative effort. And it's required that a report go in front of the Public Education Appropriations Committee by October 31st of 2019. So we are scheduled to actually present to Public Education's Appropriations Committee to the legislature on October 19th. And so with that in mind, we wanted to make sure that you as the board have seen this, the outcomes of this great study that we embarked upon and completed together. There's still room for additional input. My understanding, and I think both the gentleman up here with me will articulate this as well, and it's in your backups that the study was also presented to the local boards. So they've seen this as well, and we're just following the process of making sure that all of the stakeholders get a chance to vet this before it ultimately goes in front of the Public Education Appropriations Committee on October 19th. This is the process we took. The work group met 6 times. We started off in the month of June and pretty much got to this point in the month of September. We did, again, go and research and study down to the minute detail of all of the aspects that Senate Bill 4 requires. The work group membership consisted of USB board members and staff, the Regional Service Center board members and directors. We had the legislative fiscal analysts present, not for all of the meetings, but from ones towards the end. And then, of course, the governor's budget staff or staff out of the GOMB. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Crane, right, to give you some background on this. Now, you did receive, just if I may, Dr. Crane, just real quick, you did receive an update from the regional service centers as it relates to the yearly or annual requirement, for the approval of their budget that's in both code and rule. So Dr. Crane's going to provide the summary for you again to the board, but if, you want us to move through that piece quickly, but if you have any questions, there's another opportunity to become very familiar with each one of these great of the 4 regional service centers.
Okay, thank you, Scott. First of all, clarification, the meeting is October 15th,
15th, sorry.
Not the 19th. We don't want to come up on Saturday, so. Just wanted to let you know that we're celebrating our 50th year as regional service centers, providing equity and innovation for the students in rural Utah. And the next slide talks about how we've been funded throughout the years. In 1967, we were piloted by a federal grant. In '69, we were created by the Utah legislature and put in the minimal school program. In 2001, on House Bill 3, ongoing line item was transferred to the USBA budget, and we were inadvertently taken out of code. Then in 2007, we were funded by mineral lease funds through the USBE. And 2011, we were restored to Utah code. And in 2017, we received funding as a line item in the USBA report. So our funding has gone around and about, and so I think that's one of the reasons why the legislature has asked us to conduct this study. And I'd like to also reiterate what Scott said about the collaboration of this committee. I think it's been one of the most important and collaborative committees that I've been able to be on in my 41 years of education. So I want to support that. That's all I get to do. So, sorry, only 2 slides.
All right, if you'll take a look at this map, it's actually a pretty large area. If you look at the 4 different regional service centers, starting on the left, you have SEDC, then CUES, which is the one that I belong to, then SESC, and then NEWS up at the top. I'm just going to talk briefly about each area. When you hear regional service center, I hope that you'll always remember these 3 things. Number 1, regional service centers provide economy of scale for smaller school districts. I couldn't function in Sevier School District in my role as superintendent without our regional service center, based on economy of scale alone. We have to have, it brings us economy of scale in every way. Number 2 is educational equity. That allows us to provide our students a much more equitable education than we would be able to provide otherwise, just as a lone wolf school district. This way, we're in a group with several others. And then for efficiency, and I'll share you some examples of that in just a minute. First, we have CUES. This is the one that I'm a member of. It's located in Richfield. You can see there the 7 school districts that make up the CUES region. There's 8.5 FTE. As I scroll through these, you'll see they're all a little bit different, but also very similar in what we all try to accomplish as regions. The next region, here it comes, is NEWS, and they're based in Heber City. You can see several school districts, and four charter schools are also included in that group. They have a fewer FTE based on their need, but they have actually more students and more educators to serve. So you can already kind of see they're different, but they're same in scope and vision. The next group, I'm just working our way across the state, SEDC, located in Cedar City. You've got 6 school districts, several charter schools you can see, 7 FTE. So you can kind of see the differences there. And then the last group is the SESC, located in Price, made up of 4 school districts, 2 charters, 5 FTE. So there's different needs in each region, and there's local control in each region, which is very, very important. But the purpose of the different centers is very much the same. And I think most of you are familiar with regional service centers. I wanted to mention also that For this presentation, we have letters from all 26 school districts, from all 4 regional service center boards. This is something that's very much vetted, and there's lots of support behind this. It didn't come easy. It took a lot of collaboration, but it was a wonderful experience working together, and there's strong, strong support for this. My last slide, this is the best slide. Circle this one in your notes. This is what actually shows each of you what the service centers provide. Just to name a few, grant writing, for example, that comes back to economy of scale. Fingerprinting is very important in our region. We have hundreds of people needing fingerprinting, and that's something that can be provided through the regional service centers. As you read through there, you can just see all the different benefits. One of the ones that's most important to me is the collaboration among superintendents. We get together, 7 of us, we all share very similar challenges and different things, and we meet monthly, and just that collaborative effort, I couldn't survive without it at this point, the support we receive from one another. This is a wonderful, wonderful thing, and it's a great opportunity to be able to improve it this year.
So with the study, key takeaway or deliverable was the current governance structure. As you can see, I won't read it word for word, but this is the current governance structure. One of the key takeaways for you as well in your consideration and review of this is that going forward, we wanted to ensure that we balance the current governance structure, trying to make sure that we keep it in place with some great innovative ideas on how to proceed with recommendations to the legislature. One piece of this too is each RSC has a local LEA as their fiscal agent, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed. Here's your current role of the Utah State Board of Education. This is summarized. Obviously, your role is much bigger, the governance and all that, but this is we focused in and made it to the current role of the Utah State Board of Education for your review. Here's your current funding sources. It's important to take, as we progress together through this demonstration or through this presentation, this is the current appropriation is through a line item. As Dr. Crane articulated, he gave you the history of the funding. This is where we're at now with the regional service centers, $2 million, and it's equally split, $500,000 per regional service center based on that current funding. They also receive additional funding through Utah Education and Telehealth Network, region LEAs, and federal and state grants with the totals for your review. Here it is in a visual display, basically broken down annual revenue categories: local, state appropriation, UETN, and the grants. What percentages make up the overall revenue that goes into the regional service centers? With that, having met the intent of Senate Bill 4, we went into the Workgroup Recommendations as it's specific to governance, and here they are. The key aspect of this, and as part of, I mentioned earlier that we conducted an exhaustive study using examples from other states and arrived at what's called a Regional Educational Service Agency. The RESA allows more flexibility under ESSA. It allows for these 3 key categories, but in addition to those, there's all their minor, if you will, or other aspects that would benefit not only the state, but especially those LEAs within or served by the regional service centers with a conversion to the Regional Educational Services Agency. And Superintendent Douglas, Dr. Crane, jump in anytime on any one of these slides if you have this, if you have any additional information. Going along with the point I made earlier about governance, we want to continue the current structure of local governments while enhancing communication and collaboration with the USBE. This is a value-add, multifaceted ability to ensure that the individual student, no matter where he or she is at within the state, gets all the appropriate and awesome levels of service that are available through what is now the regional service centers, but by way of conversion to educational service agencies will just exponentially increase, again, the ability to deliver even more. They're providing great services now, as you saw on the one slide, but in collaboration with USBE just to exponentially increase the outcomes for our students. There'll be a continuation of an accountability process and, of course, reporting to the USB that you were a part of last month by, even with the conversion, if that were to take place, by the RSCs become educational services agencies. Here's our recommendations on what the USBE role would look like for your review. And Chair, if there's any questions that come up at any time, we'll address those.
I'd like to add on this part, Scott, that one of the recommendations we had is that we would create a coordinating council that would be made up of representatives from the USBE and the service centers. I think that's an outgrowth of the collaboration committee that we've had to create these recommendations. And I think it's been just a wonderful experience, and we'd like to continue that so we can increase the coordination and cooperation with the USBE.
Then just one other quick thing, a hurdle that we always seem to run into with our regional service centers is that they're kind of, we've noticed board members, legislators, they say, what is this? So anytime we've needed something or come to communicate on something for regional service centers, the first question is, well, what is this? So I think where it says we're trying to create a new type of LEA is very important. It's not an LEA like every other LEA, but it needs to be enough like an LEA to where funding can flow, grants can be written, different hurdles that we've continued to come across can be removed to where it flows and it works. And that's why calling it a regional educational service agency is very much key to this process, not only when it comes to those same three things I mentioned, economy of scale, efficiency, and equity. It'll really help us. Instead of spending all of our time explaining what regional service centers are, we can start with what we really need to start with. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. We have a couple of questions. It's okay. Board Member Cindy Davis.
Happy 50th anniversary. Is participation in the extra services that are provided here, is participation need-based?
Absolutely. Generally, and I think a good way to answer that is there are, each year it appears at this point, charter schools that are joining. They're seeing the need, they're seeing the benefit, and different, depending on which location, there's more. It's very much local control. So as we've seen a need, that's what I like. And as you see the graph with the funding, the legislature always likes to say, well, where's your skin in the game? Well, our skin is 2 million of the graph. That's showing that we have a need that we're willing to invest in. We just don't have quite enough to make it happen. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm wondering, because I'm seeing like Park City participating, I'm seeing Washington School
Yeah,
District
I see what
participating,
your
and
question is.
I'm asking, what is a rural school? How do we define a rural school? And is participation in these extra services limited to rural schools? Because if I'm a smart school or district anywhere in the state of Utah, I'm going to say, I'm going to join this because they have extra funding. I'm going to keep my funding more for
Yeah,
instruction.
I see
in my
what you're
spot.
asking now. So I'm very similar in our region. So Sevier School District is twice and 3 and 5 times the size of some of the other districts in our region. But that's one of the beauties of the regional service centers is that we definitely still have a tremendous need, and so does Washington, and so does Park City and some of the larger districts. Their need might be more based on collaborative effort, and they still need some economy of scale. Even if you combine all of our districts, we're still significantly smaller than some of the large, like the Alpines, and some of the large districts. But we also feel a sense of, collaboration and sharing, where I know so for example, we've just hired a medical health specialist in our region. Now, if I got my share, I would say they spend 4 days in my district a week, and you guys can split them for 1. But we know so much better that we're better than that. We share. We always have kind of a base plus type formula. They're still, they're rural, but we also couldn't survive without the larger districts supporting and sharing and collaborating as well.
So
But
there
there's
are no
still-
restrictions. Anyone can join.
No, there are definite restrictions
Okay.
written right into the law. I didn't realize that's what you were asking.
Yeah.
But there are definite restrictions. There aren't any other school districts that are allowed in under the law right now. There are charters that are popping up, and they have right to join.
Anywhere geographically?
Depending on, they would join which of the four that they meet geographically. So if they're in the CUES region, they would join the CUES Service Center.
Yeah, the process is, correct me if I'm wrong, through interlocal agreements.
So one in
Correct.
Salt Lake City could join?
A charter, yes.
Yes, a charter, yes.
I think.
Well, they're
you're-
not, no, they couldn't, because they're not in the
They're
the
not
Salt
in
Lake
the
City,
geography.
if you look at the map, they're not in any of the regional areas.
So it has to be
They
in
have to
the
be in that
rural,
region.
regional
Yeah,
area?
that's what she's saying.
That's the question I had. Thank you.
Yep.
Hey, Board Member Linda Hansen?
We've gone through this a lot since I've been on the board, and so a question for you guys. So a couple of years ago, there was a lot of discussion about you guys being more collaborative and working with USBE more. And the concern was that the fear among some of the rurals was that USBE would micromanage you guys. And I know you wanted a more collaborative relationship. And so what has happened to make you feel like this is going to be okay the way it is, and to kind of alleviate those fears?
Do you want me to answer? Go
Maybe,
ahead.
maybe I can answer that, Linda. The governance of the service center is based on the board of the superintendents, and they still will have the governance on what things they feel are important in their district. So, but what this allows, and I guess to answer your question, why do we feel more comfortable now, is because I feel like we have a collaborative system set up to help us make those decisions. So I see it as a two-way street, that the board would come and say, we're working on a literacy initiative, and we'd like to get that out to the rural schools. Now, right now, you're limited by how many people you can do, how many webinars you can do. Now you can come to us and say, we want to work on literacy. I go to my board, I say, hey, they want to work on literacy, and they're willing to help put some money into that. They're willing to help us get people that are embedded in the school district right now that are working there, and our board would be happy with that. It's not that the board is coming and saying, do this, do that, and here's a person to do it. It's, here's an opportunity. Who do you have that we can help train to accomplish that task that's already working in your elementary or high school? And that's how I see it going from now on.
And speaking of staff from the USB, if I may, Chair, to address that question, in that second bullet, that this work group came up with this solution, if you will, to that question, with that coordinating council. So it's as we progress further into the presentation, but then in the presentation, the public education approach, and depending on where we go from there into the legislative session, all this will become much, much clearer. We really did get into a lot of details as part of the group, but for this purpose, we're keeping it at a high enough level, but with enough detail to move forward into PEA. But I really feel strongly that it is just that, it's that cross-collaborative effort. So,
Okay, Board Member Bolter?
sorry.
So what is it that the regional service centers are doing now that they're not able to do? Like, because you're talking about bringing them up to like, kind of like an LEA, function like an LEA, so that they can offer more services. Are they not able to offer those services
So
now? Or
I think a good example of that would be a grant. So there's been the way the legislature does qualifying grants, and a lot of times they come through you all. Our regional service center has a tremendous need as well. So a good one that we just went through, that had we not started this movement would have been impossible, that we're going in the middle of, is House Bill 373, which provides mental health counselors for school districts. We have Wayne County and Tinnick School District and Paiute School District in our region, and they're so small that they didn't get enough to even come close to hiring a mental health counselor. But the CUES region, if we have economy of scale step up, we could hire one that they could share. But where they're not an official LEA, they're not eligible for the qualifying grant. So by making this move to where they're now called a regional educational service agency, they can be that to where they could make a grant possible. That's just
Okay,
one example.
So they're able to offer more resources
Correct.
to the
The funding will
LEAs and
flow.
schools within.
They're now eligible for those types of grants. That's just one example, but there's several others that are very similar.
And Chair, based on, if I may, based on the innovations we've made for grants management systems and along those processes, we don't meet all the state requirements and rules for distribution of the funds, should those grants be authorized for them, so.
Yep, and it actually saves money in the long run. Then districts that are so small, so my district, we were able to hire one full mental health counselor with matching funds through that Senate bill, that same House Bill 373. But other districts that are too small now, they can access that through our regional service center, through the CUES region. And it flows so much more smoothly without having to jump all these crazy hurdles to make it happen. This new way will be so much more smooth.
Okay, there's no other questions, if you want to continue.
We'll move on to the next slide, which is the workgroup recommendations specific to funding. What we recommend is that we codify that the regional educational service agencies' state line item appropriation in the USB budget is adjusted annually. Now, since we put this together and it's been in your backups, there's been some additional ideas or some positive input as far as perhaps expanding this even to other alternative sources. So, but from here, between now and when we go October 15th, we'll be meeting again to actually probably come up with some additional solutions to just these. Our collaboration did not just include the members that I listed or that we listed as far as that goes. Since then, too, we've cross-collaborated with legislators that have made some great recommendations on how to proceed up to and after the October 15th presentations to public education appropriations. So I just want to make sure that you know that these are options, but they're not necessarily the only options that the work group will recommend. I think we're going to develop this a little further, if that's okay to say.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah. So with that, then I'll go to the next slide, which is what we would request. And of course, we have Deputy Superintendent Stallings, who has been an integral part of this process. She came to some of the meetings towards the end, but she does so well, advised us with 53G 4410 code amendments or potential code amendments, which, in that particular code would be where we would establish as regional education services agencies. And this goes to the earlier question by Board Member Bolter about, what difference could this make in the re-establishment or change to this particular designation? With 53G 4-410, it would clearly delineate the role of the director versus the LEA superintendent. So to some of the earlier questions too, is what would change or what could change and what makes it more feasible, if you will, to adopt this and the support that we're seeing from the field is, along these specifics that we would provide as part of the code change. And then there would have to be or include a budgetary amendment. Again, we're going to, further expand or look at alternatives for ongoing legislative appropriations. This is just where we were at coming out of the last meeting and ensuring that we're getting this in front of you ahead of the October 15th presentation to the Public Education's Appropriations Committee. From codification or law would be the requests of changes to 277-706, again, which Deputy Superintendent Stallings and her staff would be an integral part. It would incorporate the new requirements of the amended statute, and it would update the reporting requirements to include new functions of the regional educational services agencies. And with that, we're open to further questions, and we'll proceed accordingly with the October 15th Public Education Appropriations with your input and guidance.
Are there any other questions on this topic? Okay, Board Member Scott Hansen.
I just have one that's not directly related, but why is there not a regional service center in northwestern Utah? Cover all that. There's jackrabbits and a few kids up there.
I'm not sure. I think the easy answer is just the fact that the populations in general are so much larger up there. You're right, there are pockets where they aren't, but a lot of those schools are picked up. You look like isn't Vernon Elementary in some of those, or are they in Twilla?
I think you're probably
Tinnick.
talking about Goose Creek.
But even some of them have economy of scale that some of the others don't. And then I just wanted to be clear on Board Member Davis's question. We need some of those other, the way it's evolved, I could see some of those, Washington has just grown exponentially in the last 50 years, there's no question. But I know that region would struggle without their support and help. It blesses them to have Washington included in their regional area. Does that make sense? And it actually blesses the whole region. And Washington is the big brother. They could live without it, but the others couldn't live without them. Does that make sense? They include them in their trainings. It's a blessing.
Terry just let me know the Box Elder could have been, but they backed out.
Okay, yeah,
So,
you mentioned that. Years and years ago.
years and years.
Chair
Long before
Huntsman?
me.
Oh, sorry, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Were you finishing something?
Yeah.
Okay, apologize. Chair Huntsman.
It was fun being a part of this and invited in. I know some other board members kind of got in on the dialogue, but this is really looking forward to well, first of all, appreciate all your work and the collaborative work. At one time, it felt many years ago a little bit about us and them between USBE and the regional service centers, and it's been exciting to see that it's all one team, one mission. USBE absolutely has things that can complement the service centers, and and I'm quite pleased to see this presentation, and I'm sure the legislators that are going to be receiving this are going to say, "Wow, you guys rolled your sleeves up and went to work with these proposed betterments. It's better accessibility, and I'm not afraid of that accountability word too. But there's better accountability, transparency." And it just puts those regional service centers kind of on the front burner. And it's almost like be careful what you wish for. But right now, the way the governance is set up with the local control and all of that, it'll be exciting to see where this goes, and especially for these rural districts. So thank you for your service.
One last little piece, if I may. It kind of goes along with your comment and then Board Member Hanson's question with, thank you for your work. What I wanted to say is the portrait of a graduate, your strategic vision, you've made it very easy to align with. There's no reason that we wouldn't jump on board and have full alignment with the state board's strategic plan and vision. Why wouldn't we? It's perfect. It fits ours. So you've all made it very easy, and that doesn't exist. There's no... We align perfectly when it comes to that.
Hey, thank you very much for your time, and thank you for joining us. Yes, Jeff?
I'd also like to say thanks to Superintendent Dixon and Chairman Huntsman for all their support and appreciation in this process. And I said this to the committee last meeting. I was not, how do I say this nicely? I wasn't so enthusiastic about this committee to start out with, or how it could turn out. And I am very pleased and pleasantly happy of the coordination, the cooperation, the collaboration, and the working of the State Board of Education, especially you, Sid. I mean, we have honor and hope that we can increase our ability to provide those equity services to the children. And I work with kids from Helper Junior High School to Navajo Mountain, which is 8 hours apart. And the area is bigger than Pennsylvania, and our needs are different in each one of those districts. But we come together as a board and determine what we can do together that will help those students. And it looks different from every other service center, which I think you need to understand. We don't do everything the same because our boards, our schools, our area is different. But we are in support of this, just like all the other service centers. We're all 100% behind this. Look forward to the opportunities that this will allow us to have. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Superintendent Dixon?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to tell the board that this is a dream come true for me. When I was serving in the role of deputy, I talked often about repurposing the regional service centers, and it was one of my goals as superintendent to work with these fine gentlemen to think about how we might better support them and utilize their services. So it has been really fun to be a part of this. Deputy Jones has done a great job in leading this initiative from our office. And when he speaks about the collaboration, that's been the fun part of it, to see everybody come to the table and think about how we can maximize support for our schools. And I shared with you this morning, watching how the kids were so excited over the skulls and the rocks and minerals that came from somebody from news actually dropping that off at, I keep wanting to call it Dutch John Elementary, at Flaming Gorge Elementary in Dutch John. And the person who made that trip had made some drop-offs along the way to the schools in that region. And what a service that is for those kids to have a hands-on experience. So that was just one of many examples of the things that they do. And I just feel so proud to be associated with these good men and the work that their staffs do each and every day. I can't imagine our state without the service centers. So thanks to you for your flexibility and willing to engage with us and move forward to a place that we can very proudly sit in front of the legislature to help them understand how we might repurpose what you do.
All right, thank you very much for joining us today. Okay.
Good job, guys.
Okay, we'll circle back to 11.1 as part of our 2020 legislative session preparation and start with the USBE review and approval of carry forward non-lapsing balances spend plans. That's a lot of S's.
Chair, Deputy Superintendent of Operations Scott Jones for the carry forward spend plan summary. If it's okay, Chair, invite Financial Manager Sue Mack and Minimum School Program Coordinator Jacob Houtro, or Jake. Houtro. Come up here, Jake, and tell me how to say that. Okay, that's okay. She'll join us. So. As part of, overall, as part of the Budgetary Procedures Act and the Money Management Act, as you know, we just completed year-end close activities for state fiscal year 19. We're three complete months into state fiscal year 20. At the end of state fiscal year 2019, we identified the following carry forward balances, or balances that were left over. It's broken out by section, and then because we do program accounting here at the Utah State Board of Education, we identify the amount of carry forward or money that was left unspent at the end of the previous fiscal year, because we are where we are now. Of the carry forward amount, there's a certain amount that is obligated, that is actually, destined to be spent in some fashion, either for a contract or, something internal to the program, sustainment of that particular program. However, in the carry forward balance, there are remaining amounts of carry forward that are unobligated or unencumbered or uncommitted, that by way of this process, we come to you as staff or to the board and this is done in a very good process, meaning it's inclusive of all the program directors and the sections. They meet with Deborah on a regular basis to get us to this point, and they actually come up with the recommended spend plans that you're seeing here by section, by program. So with that, we generally, part of this process, and Chair, this is up to you, is it's usually started by a motion that says, accept or approve the spend plans of as the staff have presented it to the Utah State Board of Education on October 3rd, 2019. Then the board, usually you open it up for, discussion to the motion so that board members have an opportunity to ask questions or seek clarity or make changes to any of the proposed spend plans by the staff. That's just a recommendation on how to proceed. It's not, necessary that we do that. We can open it up to questions right away. But Chair, I would recommend we proceed in that manner.
Okay, we will. Chair Huntsman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a motion that the board approve the allowable use of non-lapsing carry-forward funds by USBE staff within the spend plans as presented.
Okay, the motion before us is that the board approve the allowable use of non-lapsing carry-forward funds by USBE staff within the spend plans as presented. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, Deputy Superintendent Jones.
I do have a couple of salient points to make for your review. So for instance, if we start off with the first assessment is the section in the program, you'll notice that we've highlighted particular amounts, not necessarily in every program, that says return for board reallocation. That's the recommendation. So basically what we're saying is that, staff did their due diligence, they came up with this, but that particular amount would be returned to the board's budget, to be used as remember I updated you on the discretionary account? We'd use that and move along those lines too. There are some other additional highlighted ones, and this is really an important takeaway for the next agenda item. So for instance, if you drop down to the college and career ready assessment program under assessment, we make a recommendation here. The legislature is always asking us to look internally, find funding that would support your business plans or your, for the next fiscal year for 2021. So you'll see those highlighted specifically just in this example for Utah School Leadership Business Case is one-time funding. That amount in the early learning business case, one-time funding that we could use. Your carry forward balances are one-time funding. It's very difficult to support like ongoing concerns such as, full-time equivalents or employees, right? Or ongoing programs. Your carry forward balances, though, are optimal to be used for one-time purposes. So where last month we proposed one-time funding along the lines of your state fiscal year 2021 budget proposal, here is an opportunity to look internally and apply funding towards those outcomes, meaning towards your 2021 sustainment, if you will, or advocacy or promotion of those particular business cases that we'll get to here in the next agenda item. So I just want to make sure that you have the opportunity to scroll through and look at some of the highlighted ones that we brought out, and that's a time-sensitive aspect. We would never pressure the board to say, well, if you don't do this, it's a time thing. But my understanding is Sarah Young's here in case you need some, descriptive detail on the Qualtrix request. It's near $1 million, a little over 950, I think, somewhere around there, but close to $1 million. There's differing amounts between all of the requests and the pieces and parts that we're making here to use our money in the most efficient and effective way possible in the interest of the individual student and our individual educators.
Board Member Linda Hansen.
I think this is great, Scott, but let me make sure that I understand. So if we go through and we find some that you're suggesting that get one-time funding for those business cases. Okay. So then when we go down and reduce the amount that we're asking from the legislature by that amount, is that correct?
Yes.
Am I understanding that?
Yes, potentially given how you feel and process through the next agenda item, which is your 2021 budget request. So by approving these, when we get to that, Sue will make note of it, right? She'll say, okay, you approve this, either you approve it holistically or maybe you take the one eaches of each one of these. And so for instance, say you back up to I'll just stay on the example I was. Where was I? So this one right here, Utah School Leadership Business Case one-time funding. If you approve that, when we get to the next agenda item, that conceivably reduces that request for that business case. Should you approve that being as part of your budget proposal to the Governor's Office of Management and Budget.
Okay, perfect. Thank you,
In
Scott.
accordance with the Budgetary Procedures Act.
Awesome.
Okay, I don't see any other questions regarding this motion. So the motion before us is to approve the allowable use of non-lapsing carry-forward funds by USBE staff within the spend plans as presented. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Okay, that takes us to the next item, which is a K-12 Qualtrix contract. Now, normally contracts are on our consent calendar, but this one was pulled out separately because of the need to look at our discretionary funds first. So we'll let Deputy Superintendent Scott Jones speak to this.
Well, to that, Chair, you made the point on the Qualtrix contract. We could bring up Sarah for additional information on that piece to it, too.
Are there any board members that have questions on this particular contract? As mentioned earlier, the only reason why it's not on our consent calendar is because of the need to approve the discretionary funding first. So I don't see any questions for it, so I would need a motion to approve the K-12 Qualtrix contract as presented. Board Member Lear.
Approve the K-12 Qualtrix contract as identified.
Thank you. Is there a second? I'll second that. Okay, the motion before us is to approve the K-12 Qualtrix contract as presented. Is there any discussion to that motion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next is 11.2, which is the budget formulation process.
Okay, so, I'll invite Dell Frost to come up as well. Let me get to that one. You can stay here.
That's your little
This particular agenda item is an iterative process where we arrive at your decision on what to propose by way of the Budgetary Procedures Act that's required to the governor's office. The governor's office typically makes the deadline towards the end of September, but they recognize that you as a board meet, the first week of October, and so have allowed this process to continue on into this month to allow you as sufficient time as possible to review the business cases, to get the input, feedback, details, information, and/or requirements that makes for a good decision-making process on what to put into your budget proposal to the governor's office in accordance with the Budgetary Procedures Act. Just to orient board members to the updated budget formulation tracker, Dell Frost can provide the details behind this. All of the changes that were made to the tracker were a result of your input and your direction for us to provide, for instance, or for example, a column that shows the current funding amount. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dell to provide you some additional details on what the tracker looks like now so that we can follow it and proceed with the decision-making process on what your budget proposal is for state fiscal year 2021.
Thank you, Scott. Chair Huntsman, Vice Chair Cummins, board members, Dale Frost, Fiscal Policy Analyst for USBE. As Scott was saying, the majority of the changes were a result of direct feedback from the September board meeting. In addition to the current year funding amounts that we added, we also updated the tracker categories for the business cases. I'd like to quickly walk through those categories for you. So the first category, Category 1, is the same as Category A from your previous tracker. We added Category 2, which shows the business cases that are directly connected to a strategy or metric under your strategic plan, broken out by the 4 goals of the plan. And this is feedback that wanting to see how they relate with each other, the different business cases. And then Category 3 applies to the remaining flow-through requests that are broken out, whether they primarily relate to program maintenance or are a new or expanded program. Category 4 applies to USB internal requests, also broken out by program maintenance or new or expanded programs. And then finally, Category 5 is the same as the previous tracker's Category D, which contains USDB's budget requests. For each business case, we delineated the amount of ongoing versus one-time funding requested and whether those one-time requests are for this year or next year. And so the last point, last action that you took certainly impacts that. And you'll see at the top of the tracker a table that breaks out each of these amounts by category. And then we finally updated the business tracker's summaries and formatting with the goal of making it easier for you to use and better assist you in your decision-making. And that concludes my summary of the changes.
So with that, as I articulated, is some of the methodology behind this process is to typically start with a motion from the board, to either adopt or approve or recommend approval of the budget for submission by staff as part of the Budgetary Procedures Act.
Do we have a motion to move forward? Board Member Board Member Linda Hansen?
Whoops. I move that we move forward with this, that the board approve this.
So is the motion to approve these budget priorities as our FY 2021
Yes. And
budget
then,
priorities?
then if people want to amend, they can amend, but yes, let's start with that.
Okay. Is there a second? Okay, so the motion before us is to approve the fiscal year 2021 budget requests. Okay, Board Member Belknap. Or is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Belknap, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. First of all, just as a quick reminder, we can ask for 6%, but we can't ask for everything. So we've got to decide where you ask for money, so we just need to be careful of that. But I do have a question, and it's actually on Category 3A, and it's the Adobe Connect. Adobe Create Utah, and I realize that this passed last session. However, I have heard that Adobe will not sign a data privacy agreement, and if that's the case, we've got a problem. So does anyone know that? Okay, we can pass on that and they can come back.
Okay. We've got someone here that can
And
answer it.
I apologize, Chair. I should have said this earlier. Staff are here and available to answer questions, so as needed, we'll bring them up.
Okay.
Okay.
Just please hit the button on the front of that speaker, please.
Turn red. There, you're on.
Okay, I'm Aaron Bodell. I'm a education specialist in CTE. And I guess the primary person on this particular project. Regarding the question about data privacy, I believe that the policies are such that, what am I trying to say here? It's there's an agreement there with the data privacy group. I really apologize. I'm super nervous. Sorry for me. I think that in the policy that there's not the agreement, or the data privacy agreement didn't have to be signed.
Yeah, just look at me and talk to me.
Okay,
You tell
thank
me.
you. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. That helps.
Go ahead. You're good. You got it. It's in the data privacy.
It's in the data privacy policy that because UETN is the fiscal agent for this, that they've managed the data privacy piece of this.
Right. So with that, from the legal aspect, we could bring Michelle Buse forward to talk about the legal aspects of it if the chair will allow.
Yes.
You did great. Don't worry. Yeah, he's good. Yeah, you got it, Aaron. Good job.
Michelle Buse.
the Assistant Attorney General. I reviewed this at length too, and actually had some back and forth communications with Adobe. And it turns out that any student data is actually managed and controlled and held by the LEA. It's not held by Adobe. Adobe is the conduit, but the one who has the password ability to control the data that's held in any cloud server is with the LEA. And the LEA can't delete it at any time. They can go in and monitor it at any time. So the LEA is actually the one who keeps any student data.
And Chair, if I may, that's to Aaron's point about the privacy agreement
Not with
to
us.
ensure that
We
it's
set up
agreed to at the
personally.
local level, and the custodians of the data are the custodians of the data. And it's
I had-
protected.
I had a question whispered to me from a board member here, could Adobe access it? And the answer is no, because the LEA actually sets up the parameters and the passcodes and everything. Adobe doesn't set it up and then say, put in your passcode and change it and we'll keep it in case you lose it. They don't have that. The LEA actually is totally in control of that information.
Follow up on that?
I would like to remove this until we could get further information, because I'm very concerned that they won't sign a data privacy agreement with us and/or with UETN. I don't care which way it flows. It really bothers me.
Okay, so there's a motion. Is there a second? Second. Okay, so the motion before us is to remove the Adobe Create Utah item. So the Adobe Create Utah item from the board's legislative priorities. Is there any discussion specific to that motion? Okay, Chair Huntsman?
Yes, a concern I have is until all that's resolved, you know, the questions, concerns, where that's going, are we sending a message that we don't want that service in the future? Even though I think there's a need and a want there. It's whether we get to the finish line, whether we can resolve the concerns that we have with Adobe. So I'm a little reluctant to support taking it off until that's resolved, and unless somebody's got more information than what was just shared.
Okay, Board Member Hanson, Linda Hanson?
I would agree with Mark. When I was on the rural schools as their liaison, they were really counting on this. And so I think we should keep it on and try to work things out with them.
Okay, Deputy Superintendent Jones, if you want to speak really quick.
If this helps,
Go ahead.
if this helps for your consideration, for the board's consideration, the Budgetary Procedures Act is just that you make your proposal initially to the governor's office, right? There's still opportunity in that timeline, so that, you know, I don't know how long it would take to clarify this. But you also have to keep in mind, too, that even if the governor doesn't make it as part of his proposal, right, you still have opportunity to, you know, either amend your proposal in front of the legislature at a later date, so that, you know, should we get clarity and all that, you can put the business case forward with that condition, with that caveat that we're still, you know, before the legislative session, we try to get that answer in order for you to, because remember, for those of you who've been here, we typically get called up to the table at some point. I call it up to the table with the Public Education Appropriations Committee to say, what are the priorities? What do you still need or have requested as part of the overall proposal for your budget in 2021? So there would be opportunity. I do think you should record it as a condition of your proposal, right? But then we could proceed with the proposal if that helps at all.
Okay. Board Member Earl?
Okay, so mine has to do with the early learning again.
Okay, so right now we're speaking directly to the motion to remove
Oh, sorry.
Adobe Create Utah. Oh, that's all right, we'll keep you there. Okay, Board Member Gravitt? Oh, sorry, it's right here.
I was trying to be so patient. I just wanted to echo that I think there is a need and a want, And I have to tell you that when the teachers at my school heard about Adobe, they cheered, they clapped, they stood up. And I just think I would be hesitant to remove this where teachers are counting on it, and I understand that maybe we have some questions in place, but I just don't want it to jeopardize this really great thing for teachers and students.
Board Member Belknap?
I'd like to amend, I so appreciated Scott's words that we amend the condition of that there is data privacy of our students along with this. And so if anyone will take that, that'd be great.
So instead of removing it, you want to put a condition that in order for this to go forward, that there be assurances that student data privacy is secure. Okay. Okay. Okay, so that is the amendment before us, is that we're leaving it on the list, but asking for the condition of assurances of student data privacy. Is there any discussion to that amendment? Okay, so, oh yes, Board Member Scott Hansen.
So I'll speak in favor of the amendment because I think we need to pass this and get it moving forward. But I am looking at Adobe's privacy policy on their website. This is for schools, and it says any student data gathered is for the use and benefit of the school, used for no other commercial purpose other than operating or improving the products and services the school is licensed, which looks like they can access it to do whatever they consider improvement of products and that sort of thing. So I do think we need to look into this a little bit further. There's some language about FERPA as well if you look at that page, but I think we need to study this a little bit more.
Deputy Superintendent Jones.
We appreciate that. If Finance Committee members may recall that the Adobe did come and testify or, speak to this. I think given that information that Board Member Hansen has, we go back and we look at the testimony to the Finance Committee, then we can come to terms as far as whether or not it goes forward after with the condition on it, so. Okay.
So the motion before us is, seeing no further discussion, the motion before us is to put a condition on the Adobe Create Utah request to ensure that student data privacy is addressed before this goes forward. Any, please, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes.
I got it. It's good. It's a good process.
So we have a motion before us, which is the original motion, which is to approve the okay. So we're gonna, so the amended amendment is to leave it on the list. All in favor? Is there any discussion to that? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. It is on the list. Okay, that brings us back to our main motion, which is to approve the proposed list as our budget priorities, fiscal year 2021. Is there any further discussion to this? Board Member Earl.
I have a question under, just a second, let me get to, I gotta go back again. So under the early learning pre-K 3, underneath there, it talks about making legislative changes, and I'm curious what those are. Let me read what it says here. Early learning pre-K, so, yeah, under,
Okay.
are you
Chair?
guys with me?
Yeah, we'll bring staff members forward to answer Board
Yeah.
Member Earl's questions at this time,
Okay.
if it's okay with you.
Yes, please.
Hold on, it's taking me a minute to skim down. So it says, please summarize any legislation needed in conjunction with this incremental budget change request. Staff, and then it says staff seek to amend 53F2 503, the current early literacy plan legislation to be an early learning plan. I guess I'm wondering what the difference is, and as I look it up, it addresses LEA governing board of a school district or charter school that serves students in grades kindergarten through K3, and it goes through. And anyways, what what specifically is that legislation we're looking at addressing there?
Sure. So currently, Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. The question is, what is that legislation looking at? So currently, the legislation is targeted towards early literacy solely. And in early learning, we are wanting to expand to early numeracy as well. So looking at mathematics as well as reading and writing in those early grades, knowing setting that foundation does help support later years. So that's kind of the major shift within that. So we would keep the early literacy legislation as is, except for the plan. The plan would change to address early learning, which would open it up to also encompassing mathematics.
So the legislation would change, okay, because this says the legislation itself, or the law is early literacy programs?
Yeah. So it's
So you'd
currently
seek to change the
only
title?
focuses, we would actually keep the early learning bill and probably create another early literacy, maybe either add to or, because the money. So that we want to keep the money that's currently going into early literacy, still in early literacy, and then expand these dollars to allow for professional learning and coaching in early learning, which is numeracy and literacy. So we've taken an amendment to the early literacy bill and then either a subsection in that bill or a separate code to address early learning that would link the two together in terms of this plan that was called for in early literacy is now the early learning plan, and you'll address both literacy and numeracy.
Okay, so this funding would go to, it would go to addressing numeracy in
So the primary
K-3
focus
programs?
of it would be pre-K 3 and allowing
So
LEAs.
3-year-old, 4-year-old programs?
Preschool.
Or earlier than that?
No, preschool, our preschool
3,
programs.
4-year-old programs? Okay.
It's targeted towards teacher professional learning and coaching. So what we've seen in our schools that are being effective with professional learning having change in practice is that we can give training and it doesn't change practice if you don't have the job embedded follow-up with the coaching. So this allows the LEAs to provide the training as well as job embedded coaching to follow up on the training that's provided, to inspect what they expect, and to support teachers in changing their practice. So that's ultimately the goal of these additional dollars, is to change professional learning from being 1 or 2 days of hope that things change to professional learning that has a job-embedded coaching element to support teachers in changing their practice in more effective strategies in pre-K 3.
Pre-K though, right? The monies goes pre-K, not pre-K 3. Is that accurate?
It's pre-K through 3rd grade.
So money would be going to K-3 programs as well?
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was
Good
trying to get
clarification.
to. Sorry, I did, because I was
No,
asking that, sorry.
The pre-K 3, I hear what you're saying.
Didn't articulate that enough, so. That's primarily, that funding goes to training, teacher, educator training.
The bulk of that money is to train teachers and provide instructional coaching to support teachers in the training they've received in literacy and numeracy.
Okay, Board Member Lear.
I had a concern about Category 4A. The first one is another UPAC investigator. And this probably came about, the idea for this came about before the UPAC recommendations today. And for several reasons, I feel like this is kind of premature. I would, first of all, with these recommendations in place, there'd be an expedited process that would be using personnel more efficiently, it seems like, in 40% of the cases. So it seems to me that we ought to at least see how these recommendations play out before we add another person that we may not need. The other thing I didn't see in the business case was any kind of comparison. We've got one part-time investigator right now, and what's that person's productivity compared to the full-time people? And maybe this is something that would be more effective to outsource. I just think there are lots of questions. Another concern I have is because the money we're asking for training, which I feel is the most crucial thing we can do, I don't want to compromise that by asking for another investigator. There just are a lot of concerns. I feel like this might be needed, but I think we need to wait at least a year and see how effective what we have is. I'd like to see some information, some evidence, some numbers showing how effective part-time is, a part-time contract person is compared to full-time people. So for all that reasons, I'd like to take this off for now.
Is that
Remove
a
it.
motion?
Pardon me?
Is that a motion?
Yes, I'd like to remove the UPAC investigator amount of $170,700, for now at least, until we have more information.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, the motion before us is to remove under 4A UPAC request for one FTE in the amount of $170,000. Okay, Angie, did you want to speak to this?
Sure, if you don't mind, thank you. Deputy Superintendent Policy, Angie Stallings. And first, to your question about our current part-time investigator, we've been funding that with one-time funding, so we don't have guaranteed funding to keep even our part-time person. So the one new investigator that we're asking for would essentially keep that part-time person, or not necessarily that exact person, but a position. It would include the amount that we've been getting from, if that makes sense. So we would have a full-time investigator, and so a total of 3 instead of 2.5. So I don't know if that helps, but the caseload has increased, as you can see through the graphic that is in the actual business case over the last couple of years. And we also had an audit that came out from the state auditor's office where they identified multiple cases that had not been reported that should be reported, and we're anticipating increased reporting coming to the office. And based on that is why we asked for this additional investigator, or to use that money to continue to have the part-time investigator, because that is not, our part-time investigator position is not permanent at this point. It's dependent on us finding one-time funding periodically.
Can I
don't know
ask
if that's
a question?
helpful.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
of
one
Angie,
follow-up?
While we're on that, yes. So that means that if the person that's currently there wanted to stay there as a part-time investigator, that could still continue to fund that person? Or it doesn't necessarily mean that there's only going to be a full-time person hired, and that person couldn't have the opportunity to stay?
No, it could be 2 part-time people. I think in the past, there's been times when they've had 2 part-time investigators. We're not talking about any one person at this point. It's about the capacity, the amount of funding needed to support a full load, 40 hours a week type.
One more,
So,
please. And I'm still in favor of removing this until we have more information, because the other thing is we've never, though I've asked for 2 years, we've never seen any data or studies or survey that say more reporting means safer schools. We've never, I don't think just saying we've got more reporting, so we need more investigators necessarily speaks to what this is doing, as Scott Nielsen said this morning, what this means in our classrooms. And if I saw that kind of data to say we've done these kinds of surveys or these kinds of reviews or anything that say more reporting means safer schools, then that might persuade me too. But I feel like I don't have enough information right now to support a full-time person when we could do just what Scott mentioned before. Deputy Superintendent Jones said we could look to that one-time money to continue to support the part-time person until we have the training in place, and put all the money and all of our eggs in that training basket, and show the legislature we're very serious about some meaningful training. So that's why.
Board Member Cindy Davis, did you want to add to this, or do you have something, a different topic? Okay, do you mind if we come back to you in just a second? Okay. Chair Huntsman?
I'm going to speak for the funding and I'd like to reference the executive summary that came from our school fees task force on page 3. There's a paragraph in there, and I'll read the paragraph, and this helps me with this. And I know there's some recommendations. If these proposed betterments from the task force move forward, it will help with the process. But I'm not sure if it will totally take care of it, but my number one concern is this. And it says, "The task force was very concerned with the length of time it takes UPAC to resolve a case from case opening to final action by the board. For example, since January 2017, 71% of the UPAC cases took 9 months or more from opening the case to final board action, and 45% took 12 months or more. 62% of the cases took 9 months or more, resulting in a letter of reprimand or lower." And I think our educators that find themselves in that process, I believe that with another investigator, combined with some of these other proposed changes, will assist in getting these UPAC cases resolved, and in a lot of cases get teachers back teaching. These numbers are real. There's data supporting them, and so I'm speaking in favor of having that funding in place.
Okay, Board Member Cannon, did you want to speak to this motion? Okay. Okay, so the motion before us is to remove the UPAC request under 4A, the UPAC 1 FTE request. Seeing no further discussion on this, got everybody? Okay, seeing no further discussion on this item, all in favor of removing this, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
Okay, the ayes? Okay, ayes, please raise your hand. Okay, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Barlow, Board Member Cannon. Ayes. Oh, sorry. Barlow Lear. It's
I know who I
hyphenate.
am.
The other side of your name is hidden by the microphone. Sorry.
You get looking at
Okay.
both.
And you
and it
just
throws
read and go. Sorry. Okay. Board Member Lear. Thanks. That motion fails. Okay, Board Member Cindy Davis.
Just a question in the planning of the budget. We're at 85%, so schools are required by law to transport students in the student transportation portion. We cover, this is going to cover 85%, 15% comes out of unrestricted funds, things that could be used for instruction. I mean, is there ever been conversation to try to, at some point, move that to getting to 100% of what's required by code of schools?
The code is the 85%. I just want to make sure I'm clear, though.
Oh, sorry, but they're required to transport, but they're only offering 85% reimbursement, correct?
Up to
Up
85.
to 85%.
Right.
So that's something in code that needs to be changed in order to fund it fully.
Yes, you'd have to change the code to something along the lines of language that says we'll fund 100%. And then in Superintendent Shoemaker and Business Administrator Hopper can correct me if I'm wrong, this amount that we're requesting doesn't necessarily mean we'll get to 85. It closes the gap more to it, but it doesn't, this amount, we've been studying the formula and all that too. It will close the gap. We're about somewhere in the low 70 percentile as far as towards the 85%. This would really help LEAs, help districts with the transportation of the students, and closing that where we're at now to the 85% is my understanding.
What do we need for the 80? Can I ask a follow-up, Chair?
Yes.
What do we need to get to the 85%? How would that number change?
So I do have that number as an estimate, but I don't have it in front of me. I'd have to come back to you with it. We did have an estimate when we did the study and we came back. So this does help close the gap, but I don't have that off the top of my head. Maybe, I'm not sure if Superintendent Shoemaker, Business Administrator Hopper has it off the top of their head. You guys have it off the top of your head? Yeah, no, I'd have to come back to you with that amount. This does help, this request would help close that gap, though.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Board Member Cannon.
Yes, so first I have a question. We are prioritizing within these categories, is that correct?
You don't necessarily, it's up to you if you want to prioritize. You don't necessarily have to do that. What we really need to do to meet the Budgetary Procedures Act is ensure which ones of these you want to go forward. It's up to you. Usually the prioritization takes place at the request of GOMB at a later date and/or the legislature. You know, what are your priorities as board of what you submitted as far as your proposals go? Does that make sense? We do put that column on there. We have done that in the past. I don't think it's absolutely necessary at this point unless you feel like you want to, as part of this exercise, get ahead of that request, which would eventually come, and go ahead and prioritize at this point. So,
Okay, then I'd like to speak to a couple of these and change a prioritization listing. So I'm looking at category 3B, and I would like to take the University of Utah Reading Clinic and put it in a priority just underneath the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Learning Program. So,
Is that a motion?
yes.
Okay, is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, so the motion before us is to reprioritize the University of Utah Reading Clinic to occur underneath the BTS Arts Learning. Okay, is there, if you'd like to speak to that motion, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I'm a true supporter of the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Learning Program, and I hope you've taken a minute to look at some of the information that's been given you today. I have some additional information. We're told that it helps students students that have the program in their schools have higher math and reading test scores the longer the program's in the school. Students have higher attendance when they're taught using this program. Parents become more engaged in the schools with the Beverly Taylor Sorensen Arts Program, but also they're finding that teachers that teach in these schools have better retention. They would not want to be in schools that have this, and they report higher job satisfaction. So this would expand the program. We have this program available in 383 schools, but we don't. But every student in Utah doesn't get this program, and this money would make it possible for us to add additional people. There's a wait list for people to get this program in the schools, and I think it's so beneficial to kids that I want to support that. And then just a word also on the University of Utah Reading Clinic. I hope you had a few minutes to read their business case. This reading clinic is able to produce tremendously successful results working with kids, especially kids that have dyslexia. I am a mother of a dyslexic child, and I know how difficult it is and what an amazing experience it would be to give those kids success and get them reading appropriately by a third grade level. Also, this program is not a huge amount of money, but there are over 1,000 kids waiting to have this opportunity. And as these kids are taught, also teachers are taught and educated and given the professional development so they're able to go back and improve the reading of the kids in their schools. So I think it's a fabulous literacy program, and I'd like to see it given the highest possible priority.
Is there anyone in the queue who would like to speak to this motion, which is to reprioritize the University of Utah Reading Clinic? So Board Member Belknap?
Yeah, I really appreciate Miss Janet, but I think we're a little ahead of ourselves, Janet, in this case, because none of these are prioritized. They were just put on the list. So we would need to go through every section today and prioritize each section. And then from each section, we need to prioritize what's first out of everything, what's second out of everything. And I'm just so concerned about doing that before the CDC meets and we even know what our budget ideas might be. And so I would just beg that we wouldn't start moving these around until we're really ready and know what our funding amount is before we start prioritizing. Because none of these are prioritized. They're just on a list. They're just prioritized by that people want them.
Okay, Board Member Newell, nope. Is there anyone else on the list who'd like to speak to this motion? Board Member Newell, okay.
I wanted to follow up, and I agree with Janet. This is a very important program in, the old what is it, Sesame Street or wherever it was that said reading is fundamental. I know that we're not quite prioritized yet, but we have discretionary funds that we can take a look at. And I think that this is the type of program that we need to look at allocating some of that type of funding to, so that we can get above and beyond where we are currently, just because of the critical factor of reading. And it's been around for a while, but I think one of our tasks is to help improve the systems that we have in place, and funding is one way for us to do that.
Deputy Superintendent Jones?
To Board Member Newell's point, he's correct. We do have carry forward balances in discretionary funds. The request, though, is for ongoing funds. So that's a key aspect of this as well. While we might be able to sustain it for a number of years using, particular one-time money being your discretionary and your carry forward, the additional piece to these requests is whether it's ongoing or one time. So yes, sir. Yeah, just want to make sure I clarify for everybody.
Okay, Board Member Lear, are you speaking to this?
No,
Okay,
I'm sorry.
you're okay. I'll keep you there. Chair Huntsman?
Yeah.
I had a question. Oh, I'm sorry, though. Go ahead.
We'll come back to you.
I did.
Okay. And I'm speaking against prioritizing right now because we don't have that data. And again, once we get the data from the state, the WPU, a lot of things are in question. And I believe the way that we have this without being setting all those priorities is a reasonable request. And it supports our strategic plan. And then once we get more information, then we're going to have to sharpen our pencil and get aggressive. But I think we're safe with all these as just placeholders on our ask. We're not demonstrating any kind of prioritization that, and I think it's a little premature.
Board Member Lear?
I had a question related to this, and goes back to my UPAC question. We asked for some money in the recommendations for training, and that's clearly not on here because the recommendations hadn't been made yet. Will we continue to add recommendations to this, or did I miss it, or?
I believe it's on here. Yeah, so if you go down to category 4B, UPAC ethics training.
Oh, so it
It
is,
is on.
even though it was just 4B, just let me make sure.
They anticipate our actions.
Okay, a little anticipatory. Okay, thank you. I didn't see that, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion before us is to begin the process. Oh, sorry, Board Member Cannon.
Well, I think I will withdraw my motion and wait until we are in the meeting where we are to prioritize before putting that forward.
Okay.
Because I think these are both fabulous programs, and I want to be really supportive of him, but I'll wait till you give us that opportunity to prioritize.
Seeing no opposition to removal, we will remove that motion. Okay. Board Member Earl.
I just had one question on Upstart, which is not necessarily on here. Can you tell me where, am I right? Is there a spot where it's on here somewhere?
Upstart.
Oh, tell me. Yes, it is? Am I missing it? It's not.
No, you start, sorry.
You start. So,
Upstart, I just had wondered where that fits into our scheme of things. Does that have ongoing funding that is already built into?
Board Member Earl, yes, that is, there's ongoing funding for that. There's not a request in this to change
For
that.
additional funding, that will
To-
just continue the way it is?
It will just continue at the current levels.
Okay.
okay, Board Member Belknap.
Thank you, Chair. I have two things, if that's okay. One, I have a question on Acadians for grades 4 through 6. My question is if we prioritize this funding, are schools going to be required to give Acadians to grades 4 through 6? Are we going to make that a requirement?
Sorry.
And Acadians is in 3B, the first one.
No worries, I'm tall enough that it looks like I'm still sitting. Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning. Acadians would be optional for grades 4 through 6. At this time, we have a high percentage of LEAs that would like it. We would also like to give the flexibility of which students in 4 through 6. actually take it. So the LEA would decide, do all students in 4 through 6 take it? Do we have our students in 3rd grade that have not demonstrated proficiency take it? There'd be a lot of flexibility in 4 through 6, unlike the K-3 piece where it's mandatory, all students take it every year, 3 times a year. There'd be greater flexibility in the grades 4 through 6.
Before you leave, I'd like to ask a question on top of that is, what's the benefit of doing it this at the state level? Because I know districts already purchase licenses for 4 through 6.
Yeah, so this would just guarantee equity of access to the opportunity. So some school districts have found dollars to pay for it and some have not. And so it just allows this continued service. So we have K through 3 teachers getting that service, getting the opportunity to use data to drive instruction. And then when that student who maybe isn't proficient by 4th grade moves on, that data is no longer available, it's no longer useful, and there's no data to continue seeing if what we're doing is working to change outcomes for students. So ultimately, yes, when we did the survey, a number of LEAs are already doing this in their own work, which would free up dollars to do other things that they might need to be able to do at the local level. But it would bring on about another 80 LEAs that aren't currently funding it themselves.
Okay, Board Member Belknap.
Thanks. Okay, and then I have a different question, and then I'm going to make a motion that I'm probably going to be not alive after. I would like to ask Scott or his group, can you tell me what the K-12 funding is that we received last year? And you don't have to get it down to the penny. Can you tell me approximately, what did we receive? I'm sorry, Scott.
Do you mean new funding from the new funding?
The new funding. Because right here, we're asking for 432 million. There's not 432 million. But it's not there.
Is that the budget report?
Yeah, it's not there.
Hold on.
We can find it.
No. I'm sorry, I should have asked him ahead.
That's okay.
Okay, so we're talking above the line, right?
Yeah.
K through 12. The basic school program, weighted pupil unit programs was, let's see, hold on.
I'm sorry, Scott.
No, you're fine. Fiscal year 2020 appropriated $3,103,563 for all these programs here.
That's for everything. But that
Well, no,
includes,
the
that
one.
includes.
That's the minimum school program.
That's the MSP. Okay,
Right.
all right, so you probably don't have it. Well, I'm
Well,
gonna,
So, I'm sorry, what was the question? Maybe I missed the question.
you know what, it's
Total
okay.
new funding for public education.
Last year,
Oh,
K-12.
total. Oh, yes.
And it's okay, Scott, because I'm gonna make this motion and because I think that we're gonna have to be logical. We can't get it all. And so if we want everything in 2C, 2D, 3A, 4A, that it's just not there. And so I'm going to make a motion that we request a 4% increase on the WPU for next year.
Is there a second? Okay, the motion before us is to change the WP value increase request from 6% to 4%. Is there any discussion to that motion?
I know everyone.
Okay, Board Member Cindy Davis.
I think one of the things that we need to do as a state board is support our local boards. If we say that we believe in local control, I think one of the things that we need to do is really listen to the information that's coming out of our local boards. And this year, they are requesting a 6% WPU increase, and I think that it would behoove us to do the same. And I would rather see a 6% increase in WPU and have a percentage reduction in some of these other programs, because our WPU is our flexible money. It allows us to innovate. It allows us to do those things that we get to choose at the local level. So I think Laura's so great. And I understand we can't do it all, and we may need to make some cuts. But, well, I'm going to go back to what Superintendent Dixon said when she said, fund the program. Ask for fund the plan. Ask for the plan to be funded. It may not be But this is the plan, and we do have educational needs. So we can ask for the plan to be funded. It might not be, but I think it's important to ask for the plan to be funded.
Okay, Board Member Lear, are you speaking to this motion? Okay.
I agree that I very much support what the LEAs locally are saying, and it is 6%. And I think if we reduce our request, the board's request, I think it just screams to legislators, come up with more pet projects for us. Tell us what we need. Have your pet education bill. And as I just said to Jenny, you know, my furnace has gone out and I need a new furnace. I don't need my house painted green. And I think that just cries out to legislators, tell us what to do. I think asking for 6% and decreasing these pet projects of the board is a better approach. It doesn't, some of these are near and dear to me. Some of them aren't. But I think I would prefer that, though it would be painful, and give LEAs more flexibility. And will you reduce the same with them?
Chair Huntsman.
This is shocking.
Chair Huntsman.
I think we're back to a starting place, and these are all legitimate asks. And the reality is, if you go back to last year, the money that was there that they hung on to, there's a couple things that they chose not to fund. I don't know if you guys remember all of that. But I like this as a starting place. And then as the budget comes out, then we sharpen our pencil. But this is, I'm going to still go back. These are legitimate asks. And it does support our local control. But there is, I agree with Board Member Belknap, there will be give and take, and there will be reductions here and there. And some things will be a slam dunk for us, and some will be a partial win. On the governor's side, there will be slam dunks there and partial wins. It's how it works. But I think it's a really good starting place. And once we see the numbers, then we've got to get where Board Member Belknap's at, of the reality of what our asks are. And some of the hardest part of all of this is going to be what's on that WPU, and then what are these legitimate, there's no question these are good programs. There's enough advocacy out there on everything that we have on here and all these case studies to move things forward. We might not agree individually as board members that they're a highest priority in our world or from our experience or whatever, but these are legitimate asks. And I think I'm speaking against the change and say this is our starting place. And then we deal with the reality as this rolls out. So,
Deputy Superintendent Jones.
Okay, I can answer Board Member Belknap's question. We received new money last year, 2020, for the internal office budget. It was $45,066,700. For the MSP entire program, minimum school program, it was $370,018,100 for a total of roughly $415 million of new money. $415 million of new money last year, broken out by what your internal office budget and the minimum school program as a whole.
Okay, Board Member Cannon.
I speak in favor of maintaining the 6% WPU increase for this reason. Utah currently is in a state of good economy, and I think it's absolutely essential that when the economy is good, we invest in our education program. I've seen times past when the economy was good and the idea was, oh, let's freeze all the revenues so education funding doesn't go up. And then what happened immediately after that? We went into a nosedive economically, and so we maintained our program, and then we started cutting and cutting and cutting and cutting. Well, I think now it's essential that we invest in our education program during a time of good economy.
Board Member Marsh.
I'm going to speak in favor also of maintaining that 6%. Anytime you go to a bargaining table, you've got to ask for the amount that you feel that you actually need and absolutely have to maintain what we're doing and to increase the things that we want to offer to our students by way of local control and be innovative and allow districts to be their self and be creative with how they teach. Are we going to get it? I'm not sure. We might ask for both of these and they might just surprise us all and say, gosh, that's a great idea. They may only give us half of what we're asking for, and they may just say, sorry, we haven't got anything for you this year. But I think we honestly have to ask for what is going to be most beneficial and actual for what we need for the children of this state. Sitting at 51st place for spending in education right now is not a great spot when we have the most robust economy in the country as a state, and we're not willing to put forth a little bit of money to invest in the future, our future generations. So I would speak in favor of it.
Board Member Bolter.
So I agree with Board Member Belknap, but I'm about to say something that's probably going to get an article written for me that's going to say I hate children or education. So if you're going to write this article, at least quote me correctly. Because the WPU increase is tied also to an increase in property taxes. I used to be in favor of putting as much as we could into the WPU until that happened. Now, I'll support the 4%, but ultimately, I'm sorry, but I'd rather just 0% going to WPU because of that. I cannot in good conscience raise taxes on the people of Utah like that. And when the economy does crash, those property taxes are still going to be high. And it's going to affect those that are on a fixed income the most. And so we have to think about that. And I know we can sit here and tell ourselves, well, we're not actually the ones raising the property taxes, but in a roundabout way, we actually are. We're supporting it. We're saying, yeah, 6%, let's do it. And it's just concerning to me that it's tied to that property tax. So that's why, like, ultimately, I am just, right now, I will not vote for approving any budget that has any WPU on it until that changes. And so I'll support this for the 4% because at least that's better than 6%. But for anybody quoting me in the papers, that's why. I just don't feel good about raising the taxes on people because that also is raising taxes on our teachers.
Okay, Deputy Superintendent Jones?
This is a great discussion. The points that Board Member Belknap and Board Member Bolter are making, I think it would be value add for the group. I know it's getting late, too. If you heard from Superintendent Shoemaker, I collaborated with him, or we collaborate together on the proposals on the increase to the WPU. It might be good to hear a perspective from Superintendent Shoemaker of the LEAs on the tax increase and what 1%, each 1% increment means. There's no cap, right? But then, to do that, is that okay, Chair?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Terry Shoemaker with Utah School Board Association, Utah School Superintendents Association. 1% is about $34 million, roughly, okay? So I checked on that number with Ben Leishman, even though it's not been, that's not the consensus number, right, Scott, yet. Right. That's coming a little bit later, but that's close. So when you're talking about this number, you're over $200 million. When we're talking about 6%, obviously. And so we are anxious to have you support this like you have supported our other WPU requests previously. See, what's difficult, and I've lived through this as a superintendent, and even till very recently, when you support the LEA request, which in this particular case is 6%, Then when we are together up at the legislature, it is a very powerful combined discussion that we can have with legislators. When Superintendent Dixon and I get invited into meetings, Mark Huntsman and others, you know, we can do the little pinky act that she and I talk about quite often because we are together. We don't have to explain why one is at one place and one is at the other place. And then we're at odds with each other. When we are together, very powerful things happen, particularly with policy bodies like the legislature. So we had a long, protracted discussion at the delegate assembly where school board members created this request. Very long discussion. Is it too much? Getting at Board Member Belknap's question. No, the answer was no. No, it wasn't too much. It is what we need. Getting at Board Member Marsh's comments. That's the conversation we had there. I am urging you to stick with the 6%.
Before you,
Did you guys?
Oh, the tax piece? Okay. Todd, where are you? Come on up here with me on this one. Okay, does it add to an increased tax burden? The answer is the property tax will go up for every 1% increase in the WPU. That is a state statute that was tied to House Bill 293 a couple of years ago. How much that adds to that, maybe Mr. Haber from Park City, the business administrator, could talk about what that range is. That would help you.
So Todd Haber, I'm the business administrator for Park City School District and also the liaison for UASBO. The legislation was set out that as the income tax comes in through the increased value of the WPU, that there needs to be a proportionate share coming from property taxes. So there's an increment now that's added on to the basic levy that generates that match, if you will, as the income tax comes in through the WPU. The calculation is based on the prior year's revenues coming into the minimum school program and what the next year's will be given the WPU increase. And so they're trying to target something that will get the balance between the income tax and the property tax to an 85-15 split. And so it's a movement in that direction. And so it does trigger an income tax, or sorry, a property tax increase. It depends. Each year it depends on how much money comes into the minimum school program.
As a percentage of the WPU increase.
So it's not necessarily a fixed percent. Their target is to get to that 85-15.
Right.
It depends on how much comes out of the WPU and what the assessed values are. So the dollar amount will shift and change. It's the 2 years it's happened, I think it's been between $14 and $18 million.
Total, or about $4.7 million per 1% on the WPU. So that's what it was last year. He's telling you it's going to be different based on the changes that he's describing there.
I have one question as well before you leave. We've used the terms flexibility at LEAs and need at LEAs. And we, as a state board, don't have that context. And so we put a number out there, 6%, 4%, 5 million %, right? But we don't have the context of what that need is. And so I guess, are you willing to share either to us today a short excerpt of what you have, and are LEAs willing, when this goes forward at, possibly 6%, to speak to what is that need? How will this fund the board's strategic plan at the local level, and what will these funds be used for?
Well, I can't answer all those questions because you got quite a few in there, okay? But I can certainly tell you what some of the needs are. For example, we have a wide disparity between what a beginning teacher makes in one district versus another district. So that disparity means it's going to be used differently across the state in each of the individual school districts. We have a wide disparity in how the benefit costs are calculated in every school district. So the benefit costs in one school district versus another district, I'm not talking dollars, as a percentage of the budget is different. But it's also an increasing percent because benefit costs are increasing also. Every school district creates a list of priorities of additional programs that they have that they would like to pursue. It might be a program of increasing achievement in ELL. We've had that conversation today as a discussion that the board had. That's going to require additional resources because there's not a lot of additional resources coming from the legislature for those purposes. It might be to expand a dual language immersion program. It might be to expand other types of programs and to hire additional teachers for other purposes beyond what is being received for the school district. For example, like teaching coaches. That's not money you receive additional money for, but it might be a priority of a school board to do so, which means you're going to have to create ways to pay for it. So all of those additional things can be used with the additional that's received that comes from a WPU increase. It takes approximately 2.5% increase from year to year just to keep pace with inflationary costs from year to year. So if you have a 2.5% increase in the WPU, if that's all that we receive, that's basically keeping us level from where we were the previous year. So anything beyond 2.5% allows us to accomplish other things. So when we get a 4%, for many school districts, this is the truth, their percentage teacher salary increase was 1%, not 4%. Because they couldn't come up with the additional funds locally to make a difference there. Some school districts, it was very, very hard for them to come up even with the 1%. So what I'm trying to tell you is it all depends as to what those priorities might be, and every school district is in a very different place. Todd, do you want to add to that?
And so just as a follow-up, would school districts and charters, I guess as a whole, LEAs, be willing to share some of those needs so that it doesn't come out, so that if this request goes forward, that it's not just we just need it, right? Because sometimes
Sure.
that
We can be very
communication
specific
is very difficult
by
to
school
make.
district, and we ask school boards to do that presently. We ask them to meet with their legislators. We talk about, to tell them how they spent the money they received last year, and talk about how a 6% increase in this particular case would help them in the future.
Fantastic. Okay, Board Member Belknap?
Thank you. I knew I would be attacked, but I really love this conversation because of the realities. Okay, but, and Terry, this is rhetorical, but how will this change the insurance benefits equity or salary equity? I don't see it making it more equitable. But my question goes to Todd, if I may, Chair. And on a $100,000 house, about what would be the increase on tax? Give me a number.
It depends on your jurisdiction.
Okay,
There's
give me
not
a
a
range
simple.
then. Give me a range.
Yeah.
I know it's a huge mathematical equation, but give me a range so that, you know, we're gonna put this money on the WPU so our teachers can have enough money, and then they're gonna have to pay more where they're living. So it seems like an imbalance to me.
It's such a small fractional amount
Right.
in bringing this together under the new statute. Yes, there will be an
What does a
increase.
small fractional amount look like at
So
$100,000?
I'll give you a Park City example then. So we had raised our taxes this last tax season for $5 million, and it was $3 on a $100,000 house. So if we're talking, our contribution into that program was probably another $2 million with the WPU increase. So we're talking fractions of dollars on our property tax, at least in my jurisdiction. Yes, that's,
Yeah.
well, it stays the same. The next year is what's the next increase going to be? Sure.
Okay, but I just wanted to say, Chair, I really appreciate this conversation because I think we're going to have to look at it, and especially after the CDC looks at this and what money we really have.
Chair Huntsman?
Now, before you vote on it, I think it would be wise for all of us to look within our districts and ask the districts that's in our jurisdiction here a little bit, or who not just on our jurisdiction, but in our voting district, and ask them that very question that you asked. What did you do with the WPU from last year and the TSSA money? Because that combined is close to that 6. I might have to, tell me if I'm wrong, that was close to like a 6% WPU, if you combine the two of them together, would that be a safe assessment? TSSA and the 4% combined as it rolled out? But
You asking us that, or?
My question is, what would 6% do if we said, if you got 6%, a question that you could ask is, what happened, what did you do different last year with your 4% and your TSSA money? Because that's kind of close to. I mean, I don't need a question, but we can ask our own districts what they did. So when we come to this conversation, we'll have some kind of.
And we can answer that question.
I know they're.
Individually.
They're ready because they were primed last year to get ready, and the legislature also was asking, hey, I want to know what you did with.
Right.
With that funding. I had another thought, but I forgot it, so I'll turn my thing.
Board Member Earl.
Just, I guess, a general statement, but all tax efforts are local. And what I mean by that is sometimes we think because it's coming at the legislature, it's coming from different areas or whatever, but all tax efforts are paid by citizens, even though they're coming from different pots. So anytime we raise, I just think it's interesting, we have the dialogue that we need more local tax effort in order to justify something or in order to show that you're locally, and this even goes to the TSSA, where it talks about the local levies and stuff and the need for the increase in that. And maybe this is a legislative thing, I just think it's wrong when you tie one thing to a tax increase. In order to do one thing, you have to have a tax increase. We've done it twice in this case in order, and I've heard it said, well, because we want local effort, we want local. Well, all taxes are local. Our income tax is paid, even though it's maybe not on property tax. And I realize it gets jumbled out there, but in a general statement, it is just, we are continually increasing and paying taxes. So we just have to be as responsible as we can. And I know we're trying to do that. I think local entities are trying to do that, but we have to realize that when we continue to tie certain provisions to a tax increase, we're actually just not doing that provision. We're actually increasing taxes. Even if they're $3, they continue to be $3, $18 here, $50 here, and they do add up every year, so.
Okay, Board Member Davis?
Totally agree. I don't think there's anyone in this room that would disagree with what you just said or loves having educational funding tied to automatic property tax increases. Property taxes hurt the folks that sometimes have the least. So I totally agree in that area with both of you. I do think we need to remember that notwithstanding that the WPU money is the only money to my knowledge that is equalized.
Fully equalized.
That is fully equalized. And when we're talking about equitable access, that is a big deal.
Okay, seeing no other comments, the motion before us is to change the WP value request from 6% to 4%. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Okay. Okay. Will the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, Board Member Bolter. Okay, so that motion fails. Okay, we are back to our original emotion. Sorry. We are back to our original motion, which is to approve these budget priorities for the fiscal year 2021. Okay, Board Member Earl.
I know I've kind of harped on early education here today, and I apologize for that, but I feel like if we're going to ask for significant funding, we should put it into, if our programs from K through 12 are just succeeding tremendously and we don't have any needs there, then I think we can branch outside of that. And I know the argument is that, well, if we help this particular group, then all our other scores are going to increase. I'm not sure if that's exactly the way that turns out. I don't know that research actually says that. But I just think that funding should go into the high success of our, especially our early elementary programs. And that's just my opinion and my thought there. I don't know that we, since we're not prioritizing, right, today, I don't have necessarily a movement for that, but anyways, that's my.
Seeing no other lights or discussion on this, the motion before us is to approve the FY 2021 legislative budget requests and submit these to the governor's office as amended. I don't think, did we amend it? Oh, the provision, okay, thank you. Board Member Bolter?
I just was wanting to separate it out and vote on categories 2A, 2B down separately from category 1.
So motion to divide?
Motion to divide,
By
yes.
category?
Just,
Or just the?
just pull out category 1 and then
Okay.
vote on all the others.
Okay. So the motion is to divide category 1 from the rest, category 1 from the rest. Is there any discussion to, is there a second to that motion? Does it need a second to divide? Second to that motion?
Yeah.
Okay, any discussion to the motion to divide? Seeing no discussion, the motion before us is to divide category 1 from the rest of the list. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so will the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, Board Member Bolter? Okay. Okay, that motion fails. So back to the main motion, which is to approve the FY 2021 budget requests to propose to the legislature. All in favor, please say aye. Any opposed?
No.
Okay, will the ayes please raise their hand? Okay, so we have Board Member Haynes, Board Member Davis, Board Member Newell, Board Member Hanson, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Cannon, Board Member Marsh, Board Member Huntsman. Okay. That motion passes. Okay, Board Member Belknap?
Sorry, I just wanted to make a comment how much, I've been here a little while, and to have these business cases has made a world of difference as to how, instead of the shotgun approach, and we just, whatever we love, I really appreciate the work that's gone into people making these.
Thank you. Okay, next is the legislative policies request. Deputy Superintendent Angie Stallings.
That one, yeah.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair Cummins. Board members, good to see you again. Angie Stallings, your Deputy Superintendent of Policy. And we've got 5 legislative policy requests that we'll be reviewing with you today. And so I'll go ahead and start with the first 3, and Jeff will describe the last 2. So next month, staff intends to bring forward some ideas for changes to legislation related to the turnaround program. And because they're significant, there will be a lot of policy options. We felt it would be best to have a committee discussion regarding those potential amendments, which then means that the report out wouldn't be until December. So in the meantime, we would like to just get a bill file open, work with the legislator to get the bill file open so it'll have a lower bill number, as opposed to waiting until December once the board has discussed kind of the more substantive content of the bill. So that's the first bill or policy request. Would you like me to, should I just do as we normally do and go through all 5 and then we'll go from there? The second one is related to the early warning system pilot program. This is a program that had required about a 50% match from participating LEAs to have an early warning system in place, and we still have funding for the program. It's ongoing, but the legislative language sunset last year in June or earlier this year. We'd like to have that language reinstated. The LEAs who participated in the pilot find it valuable. They reported to the Finance Committee, I believe, in June, and so that would be the next bill file, would be to reinstate the statutory language related to the ongoing funding. And then third, you may remember that back in 2017, the board created the School Leadership Task Force or Work Group. That work group made some recommendations in December of 2018. We would like to get a bill file open to implement some of the changes or the recommendations of that work group. The changes would include potentially a creation of a TH Bell type program for our principals and school leaders to provide assistance to principals. Also, and I'm blanking, I have the list here, but it would be all related to the recommendations of the board's school leadership task force. Oh, I remember also some resources and a performance assessment, a school leader performance assessment, as well as potentially a school leadership development grant program. That's the third one.
Thank you. Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for the Board. The fourth one is Phase 2 of the request regarding school breakfast. As you recall, there was already a request to make some policy changes around making breakfast participation a little more accessible. Just as a side note, that was presented to the interim committee last month, and the interim committee of the legislature, the Ed interim committee, and they voted to make it a committee bill.
No,
So,
open the bill file.
or open a bill file. And they're currently drafting some legislation around that. This would be a companion bill that would seek to continue to make more accessible school breakfast programs for targeted populations in schools that have a certain level of free and reduced lunch students, as well as requiring schools that are on the National Lunch Program to participate in the National School Breakfast Program. The vast majority of schools that are on the lunch program do offer breakfast, but we're currently working to increase all of them. There's just a small number of schools that still need to be brought up to that. So this bill would be looking at tweaking some other policy levers to make sure that those things go into place. The fifth one is the Youth in Custody Program. As part of the Restorative Justice Initiative and the Juvenile Justice Reform that happened in the last couple of years, the Youth in Custody Program code was changed to expand essentially the money and the use of the program to not just youth in custody of certain state agencies, but also youth receiving services from those state agencies. That has created some confusion. We're not quite sure if it was an unintended consequence of that legislation and the justice reform. But currently right now, we're trying to make sure that the funding that is used, do we want to use youth in custody for those in custody, or if we are doing services, it does include students who are in the receiving services from DCFS, so this would impact essentially any child who has divorced parents. We want to make sure that the scope is what the legislature intended. On top of that, there is some funding that is difficult to expend because of the different categories in the statute that are very limited. And we would like to seek some flexibility so that we're not leaving any funds on the table and that we're getting this money to the students who need it.
Okay, so these are the five proposed pieces of legislation that we have before us, so we can add these to our list through motion. Board Member Linda Hansen?
I move that we add these five to our list of legislative proposals.
Okay, is there a second? Okay, the motion before us is to add these five listed proposals for board consideration to our approved request for statutory changes. Is there any discussion to that motion? Board Member Belknap.
I'm just looking for clarity. On number 5, are we asking for some additional funding?
No.
No additional. Okay, thank you.
Board Member Earl?
And I want some better stats on the breakfast program. And the reason why I say that is just because we're 51st in the nation for breakfast participation. Doesn't mean, maybe that's even a compliment. Maybe that means we're feeding kids breakfast, and maybe not. Some could argue that. It says that we have 135,000 students suffer from food insecurity. Do we know that these 135,000 students are not getting breakfast? I don't know. I'm wondering, is this just an expansion of what we're already doing? Is this?
Sure.
So most areas I've gone to do the breakfast,
Yes.
offer breakfast. So I guess I'm wanting to know more about this before I'd be willing to vote for it. Anyways, so I guess I need more stats on that. There's not enough there for me to vote.
Chair, if I may?
Yes, please.
So the stats currently are, we're 51st in the nation for participation of students who are at schools that have a 70% free and reduced lunch population or higher. So these are the most at-risk students. They're considered food insecure, meaning they are not entirely sure where their next meal will come from. And so we are trying to increase the participation rates of schools that have those higher level of students at the free and reduced rate, to get breakfast at an alternative style, not just necessarily breakfast before school, but breakfast in the classroom. So this would be looking at ways where we could take those schools with those really high numbers of 70% of free and reduced lunch students and say, okay, well, you have this really high at-risk population. We would like to now look at alternative breakfast styles to make sure these students are being fed and that barrier to their education is being removed.
Board Member Earl, did you have a follow-up?
So what is this asking for?
So this
Because,
bill,
really, a school could change the way they do the breakfast at their school, right? So what are we asking for legislatively here?
so we would be looking at different policy levers we could use for these schools that have the high percentage of free and reduced lunch students to require them to do alternative breakfast styles in their school. So not necessarily breakfast in the morning before school, but breakfast after the bell and in the first period. And then we would also...
So we would make that a law, is what you're saying? We would require so that they no longer had that option locally at an LEA?
There would be a waiver put in that a school who finds it to be a financial hardship could seek a waiver from the office and be opting out of that requirement. But yes, it would become a requirement.
Okay, so this isn't increasing the breakfast program. This is someone observing them eating their breakfast. Is that what, more or less, so that they know that the breakfast is being eaten?
It would increase participation.
Oh, you got someone moving back there, so.
So the issue right now with free and reduced lunch students is, in order for them to get breakfast in their schools, most schools require they come before school starts.
Right.
And this
Okay.
would now allow them to get it in first period or after the bell, which would increase participation, because one of the hurdles to participation right now is that it's before school and it's earlier.
But I guess I'm just wondering if it has to be law, if it's just best practice that we put that out there, and maybe our.
Kathleen Britton, Director of Child Nutrition Programs here at USBE. So what we're asking is, what we've seen in other states is when you put into a state law that they have to have an alternative type of breakfast, that there's more students that do participate in this breakfast. Because when you come from a high-need area, those students have to most of the time get themselves to school. So they can't get there to eat in the cafeteria on time, or they get there and there's too many other things that are being disruptive in their lives. So this would put some more safety nets for them to succeed in school, because we all know if you don't eat, you can't think during the day. So that's what we're asking, so that we can put this in place so that these schools do put these things for these students that need it. So breakfast after the bell has been very successful at junior high and high school levels. Breakfast in the classroom has remarkable evidence showing how it's helped attendance, test scores, behaviors, and everything. And so that's why we're asking, and we feel this will capture that 135,000 students that are not necessarily
Okay,
maybe having it.
That's making more sense to me. I just really wonder if we need to ask for a law, or if it's a matter of putting best practice out. Do you know what I mean? Like we do with other things, we put best practice out for, anyways, we can discuss that.
Okay, seeing no further discussion, the motion before us is to place item items 1 through 5 from the legislative proposals for board consideration category into the other category of board approved, sorry. Yes, legislative request for statutory changes. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We will take a minute break.